Okay, so let's start with the nervous system. Okay, let's begin with the nervous system. Now, the nervous system is a very interesting system and more like a complex system, but very vital when it comes to how the body is supposed to work or how the body systems are supposed to be coordinated to work. Okay, now this system, like I mentioned earlier, is a communicating system. Okay, so when we say a system is a communicating system, what it means is that it simply helps the body one way or the other to coordinate certain activities. Okay, so first of all, in coming to learn the nervous system, let it click in your mind that this is a system that helps organs in your body one way or the other to communicate. So we say it's a communicating system. Now, I mentioned the other time that this is not the only communicating system. We have another communicating system, which is the endocrine system. But what makes this system unique is that it's a communicating system, but it's a very fast communicating system. Meaning that when it comes to its activities and processes in terms of communication, they do it at a faster rate as compared to the endocrine system. Now, again, another thing that makes this system unique in terms of it communicating is that it communicates using electrical and chemical signals. Please, as I'm teaching, I'll be highlighting on very key things that you need to concentrate on in your studies. Okay, so another thing that makes this system very unique is that it communicates using electrical and chemical signals. Okay, when you go to the endocrine system, they communicate using chemical signals only. But the nervous system, communication is via electrical and chemical signals. So that point is here. So they coordinate informations or responses through electrical and chemical signals. Now, this system is divided anatomically into two main parts. Okay, so this is a system that anatomically is divided into two main parts. The two main parts, we have the central nervous system, which is the CNS, and then we have the peripheral nervous system. Okay, the central nervous system and then the peripheral nervous system. Now, this is the first point that I'm talking about. So as we are moving on, I'll be highlighting on areas that are very important in terms of anatomy that you need to concentrate on. Now, this system has two main divisions. It's very important to us in anatomy. The two main divisions of the nervous system. The two main divisions. What are the two main divisions? The central nervous system and then the peripheral nervous system. Okay, and so this is the first key thing that you need to note when you are learning anatomy of the nervous system. The two main divisions of the nervous system, as the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. Now, when we say central nervous system, we are looking at the brain and the spinal cord. Okay, so when we say central nervous system, we are looking at the brain and the spinal cord. When we say peripheral nervous system, we are looking at all nerves in your body and then the ganglia. Okay, so when we say central nervous system, it simply means when the brain and spinal cord comes together, they form the central nervous system. And this is what I'm talking about. So this is the brain. This is the brain. This is the brain. And this is the spinal cord. Okay, this is the brain and this is the spinal cord. Again, this is the brain and this is the spinal. So these two, the brain and the spinal cord, forms the CNS, the central nervous system. And then the nerves and the ganglia forms the peripheral nervous system. Okay, when we say a ganglia, here is ganglia. When the cell bodies of nerves come together, okay, so here is the ganglia. So you could see at the periphery or the lateral sides of the spinal cord, we have what? The ganglion. When we put multiple ones together, we have the ganglia. So you see, Now it looks like some progressions. It looks like some dot, some big dots. It's like a progression. Now, what is forming that ganglion is when the cell bodies of nerves come together. And we can ask you what a ganglion means. When we say a ganglion is where the cell bodies of multiple nerves come together. That gives us what? A ganglion. Remember, a ganglion and the nerves, they form the peripheral nervous system. Okay, so all these nerves. So if I ask you that, okay, what forms the peripheral nervous system in the human body? Is the nerves all over the body plus the ganglion. If I ask you what forms the central nervous system, is the brain and the spinal cord. Okay, these are basic things that we can ask you. So we can ask you that, okay, the central nervous system consists of, then you say the brain and the spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system consists of the nerves in the body plus the ganglion. Simple as that. Is that okay? Great. Again, in anatomy, another important thing that you need to note. Okay, so when I'm saying these things, you need to be noting them down because these are the key things. Another important thing you need to note is their location. Okay, where do we find the central nervous system? You could see the central nervous system is located inside the brain, the skull, and then the vertebral column. So if we ask you, where can we locate the central nervous system? It's within the brain and then the vertebral column. But specifically, so pay attention. Specifically, if we ask you, where can we locate the brain? That is the skull. When we ask you, where can we locate the brain? That is the skull. Where can we locate the spinal cord? That is the vertebral column alone. But when we ask you, where can we locate the central nervous system, that one you can't give one answer. You can't say the skull alone. You would now tell us that the skull and the vertebral column. Let me go over that again. When we ask you that, where can we locate the brain? Your best response will be, it is located in the skull. When we ask you, where can we locate the spinal cord? Your best response will be the vertebral column. Again, when we ask you, where can we locate the CNS? This time we are looking at the two together. So your response will be that they are located inside the skull and the vertebral column. Is that okay? All right, so my first question. Where in the body can we locate the central nervous system? Where in the body can we locate the central nervous system?
The brain is in the skull and the vertebral column.
Oh, the first lady didn't pay attention to the question. Where can we locate the central nervous system?
The skull and the vertebral column.
The skull and the vertebral column. Yes. So within the skull and then within the vertebral column. Okay, where can we locate the spinal cord?
In the vertebral column.
Excellent. In the vertebral column. Okay, where can we locate the brain?
In the skull.
In the skull. Okay, and these are very key things we can ask you in anatomy. We can just ask you, where can we locate the brain? The best response would be the skull. Where can we locate the spinal cord? The best response would be the vertebral column. Now, another thing that we can ask you in anatomy, a bit tricky, is that now we can ask you that, okay, which nervous system structure is within the vertebral column? What would be your answer? Which structure in the nervous system is within the vertebral column?
The spinal cord.
The spinal cord. And again, if we also ask you that, which structure in the nervous system is within the skull?
The brain.
The brain. That is possibly, if you are saying the brain, that is the best answer we are expecting you to say. Okay. Now, if we ask you, where can we locate the peripheral nervous system? Your answer will be that it is located all over your body, supplying organs in your body. Okay. Or connecting to organs in your body. If we ask you, where can we locate the peripheral nervous system? Your response will be that It is located throughout or all over your body, connecting to organs. Okay, great. Now, let me ask you some few questions on what we've done. Now, what forms the peripheral nervous system? What forms the peripheral nervous system?
All the
The
nerves.
nerves and the ganglia.
That is excellent. The nerves and the ganglia. What forms the central nervous system?
The brain.
The brain and the spinal cord.
Excellent. The brain and the spinal cord. The brain and the spinal cord. Okay. Now let's look at some key other very important things. Now, if you take your whole body, your nervous system alone constitute 2% of your total body weight. This is also very important in anatomy. This is also very important in anatomy. And I always tell my students that there is nothing, no single thing I will assess you on when I have not emphasized on it in the lessons. Okay, this very point is also very important in anatomy. The nervous system, the weight of the nervous system alone, it forms 2% of your total body weight. Very important point in anatomy. It's very important to us in anatomy. And I can ask you a question on that. Okay, now, again, the nervous system alone receives 20% of the total blood supply. This is also very important to us in anatomy. Okay, so look at all your organs. We have the heart, we have the lungs, we have the liver, we have the kidney, we have the pancreas. We have so many organs, reproductive organs and all of that. Now, the nervous system alone, you see the blood that is supplied to the various parts of your body. So, or the blood that is coming out of your aorta. Your nervous system alone receives 20% of the total blood supply. This is very serious. Yes, it's a very interesting, feature that we are interested in the nervous system anatomy. Okay, and we can ask you that as a question. So you have to pay attention to it. Okay, so 1, the nervous system constitutes how many percent of your body weight? 2%. Again,
2%.
the nervous system receives what percentage of the total blood supply? What percentage?
About 20%.
About 20%. Okay, and so these key things, the nervous system, the weight, and then the percentage of total body blood supply that it receives. These 2 things are very key to us in anatomy. Now, let's just go through the functions of the nervous system. We are not so interested in the functions, but the nervous system functions as a sensory input. When we say something performs the function of a sensory input, what it means is that it is able to send sensory informations to the central nervous system. Okay, it is able to, if you say something is sensory input, meaning it is able to detect and send the information to another structure to respond. So it performs sensory functions. Again, it's also able to integrate. Okay, when we say integration, meaning it is able to interpret or process information. Okay, because if you go to the nervous system, for example, the sensory inputs, we have some neurons that are sensory neurons, meaning they send information from one part of the body to the central nervous system. We call them sensory neurons. Okay, so because of the sensory neurons, your nervous system is able to play sensory roles. Okay, so we have the sensory neurons that are able to send information from one part of the body towards the central nervous system. Now, when we say the integration roles, we have some neurons in the body. Their role is to integrate information or process information. For example, the interneurons. Okay, interneurons. We have some neurons that we call interneurons. Okay, now the interneurons, all they do is that they are responsible for processing information. They are responsible for integration of information. They are responsible for decision making, and they are also responsible for your memory. And so, for example, if you go into your brain, a lot of the neurons there, they are interneurons. So the interneurons are basically responsible for processing of information. Okay, and that is why we can say the nervous system plays integration roles. Now, again, the nervous system also plays a motor output role. When we say motor output, all that means in nervous system is that the brain and the spinal cord, they are able to communicate to other parts of your body. And this role is performed by what we call the motor neurons. When we say a motor neuron is a neuron that carries information from the CNS and the spinal cord to other parts of your body. When we say a motor neuron is a neuron that carries information or signals from your central nervous system and your spinal cord to other parts of your body. Is that so? They are bringing the information from top down. And the sensory neurons, they carry the information from where? From the other parts of your body towards the CNS. Okay. Now, the nervous system also plays what we call, yes, please, Adjoa.
Please, you said it carries information or signals from the central nervous system.
Which of them are you asking about? Is it a sensory
The
or the
motor output.
Good. So motor output, we say that the nervous system plays motor output because the brain and the spinal cord, they are also able to bring signals to other parts of your body. And I was explaining that role is performed by motor neurons. So when we say motor neurons are neurons that are bringing signals from the brain and the spinal cord to other parts of your body. Is that okay? So more practically, the motor neurons is what help the nervous system to perform the motor output role. Okay, and I mentioned that the nervous system also plays the sensory input role. The sensory input role is also carried out by the sensory neurons. When we say a sensory neuron, this is a neuron that is carrying information from other parts of your body towards your CNS. Are we together?
Yes.
Okay. When it comes to the integration role, which part of the nervous system performs this role?
The intraneurons.
The interneurons.
Yeah.
The interneurons. Now, in some textbooks, these interneurons, they call them the relay neurons. Is that okay? Yes. In some textbooks, they may refer to them as the relay neurons, but we mostly call them interneurons. Okay. Now, if you are not careful, you may think that interneurons are just neurons that are in between two neurons. That is not a complete definition of an interneuron. Let me go over that statement again. If you are not careful, you may think that an interneuron is a neuron that is just between two neurons. That is not completely correct in anatomy. The reason is because you can have a sensory neuron that is also between two sensory neurons. So if you end your definition of interneurons by saying that, oh, interneurons are neurons that are just between two neurons, it's not completely correct. Okay. And mostly when you are defining neurons, we use the roles they play. So when we say a sensory neuron, don't say a sensory neuron is a neuron that is between the organs and the brain and the spinal cord. That is not how we define sensory neurons. A sensory neuron is a neuron that carries an information from other parts of the body towards the brain and the spinal cord. So any neuron that is carrying a signal from another part of the body towards the brain and the spinal cord, irrespective of where they are located, is a sensory neuron, provided it is carrying a signal to the CNS and the brain. It's a sensory neuron. Now, when we say an interneuron, the best way we want you to define an interneuron is a neuron that is responsible for integration. When we say an interneuron, a neuron that is responsible for integration. These are the neurons that plays role in integration. They play role in processing of information, in decision making, in memory. They are the interneurons. Now, apart from that, if you want to supplement it by saying that they are usually between neurons, then it's fine. It's perfect. But if you just conclude your definition of interneurons by saying that interneurons are neurons between two neurons, it's not completely correct. Pay attention to that. interneurons are not just neurons between two neurons. If we ask you to define an interneuron, they are neurons that are responsible for processing information, integrating information, okay? Processing information, integrating information, memory, and decision making. That is the best way of defining interneurons. Don't just settle or just leave your definition that interneurons are neurons between two neurons. It's not completely correct. Okay, so you can say interneurons are neurons that are responsible for processing information, decision making. Is that okay? Memory, and then integration. Then you can now add that they are usually between two neurons. Perfect. Is that okay? Great. Great. Now, another role the nervous system plays is hemostasis regulation. You know, the nervous system helps in terms of controlling other body systems. For example, when it comes to your respiratory rates, the nervous system plays a role. When it comes to your BP, blood pressure regulation, your nervous system plays a role. When it comes to your digestion process, your nervous system plays a role. So the nervous system entirely, it regulates several activities inside your body. So we say that it plays a role in homeostasis. It plays a role in homeostasis. And again, the nervous system plays a role in what we call mental activities. Mental activities has got to do with your thinking. When you decide to think about something, you are engaging your nervous system. When you are learning and you want to memorize something, you are engaging the nervous system. Okay? We have emotions because our nervous system is functioning, and we are able to make decisions because of our nervous system. Okay, so now let's look at the key characteristics of the nervous system. Key characteristics of the nervous system. I'll ask you questions on this area. So the first point, I've explained it already. This is a rapid communicating system. Is that okay? It's a rapid communicating system. When we say rapid communicating system, what does it mean?
It's a fast communication system.
Yes, a very fast communicating system. Is that okay? Now, do you know that you can imagine that as you are listening to this lecture right now, your nervous system is working. A certain sensory neuron is carrying what you are hearing to your brain. Imagine that when the sensory neuron responsible for carrying the hearing signal to your brain, imagine it has to take 30 minutes before the brain processes what you are hearing. Imagine that. Just imagine that when you talk, your auditory nerves, it takes about 30 minutes before they carry the signal from what you are hearing to the brain, before the brain responds. Imagine when I talk, it means that I have to wait for 30 minutes for you to hear before I continue. That is what it means. But you see, the nervous system is so rapid in the sense that once the signal goes, it responds. A rapid communicating system. And that's why we say this system is a rapid communicating system. Okay, and the other time I was explaining the speed. Look at this Formula 1 cars. I don't know, those of you who have been following these racing games, the car racing exercise or sports. Do we have this Formula 1 car in the whole of the world? This is the fastest racing car. Is that okay? This car runs at a speed of 330 meters per hour. And that is not a joke. If you are at the stadium and such a car is running at a speed of 330 meters per hour, it's not a joke. And now let's look at how nerve impulses travel, the speed with which they travel, and compare it to these sport racing cars. The nerve impulses travel at a speed of 268. Hey, it tells you this is a system that is not joking at all. Yeah, and in fact, this is a very fast speed. 268 is almost closer to this Formula 1 cars. Is that okay? Yes, and that is a very interesting thing to note. Okay, yes, almost. So the speed, you see, 268, and this 268, the nerve impulse, the speed of nerve impulse is an area we are interested in. You can jot it down. The speed of a nerve impulse, 268 meters per hour. It's also a point that we are very interested in. And so this should tell you the nervous system is a very fast communicating system. Again, this system is highly organized. Like you can see, there are so many systems that are scattered, but this system is so organized, very well organized. So we have the organization, the main organization, the central nervous system consisting of the brain and the spinal cord, the peripheral nervous system consisting of the nerves and the ganglion. Okay, now this system is also very sensitive to stimuli, very sensitive. And that is the reason why, if you want to confirm that, that's the reason why the moment someone touches your body, the nervous system, through the nervous system, you are able to detect that someone has touched your body. Imagine that when someone touches your body, it's supposed to take about 1 hour or an hour for you to hear or sense it. Just imagine that if someone should touch you, or if you should touch a hot object, it should take about an hour before you feel it. Imagine. What that means is that you can be walking around, someone will slap you, you go home in an hour time before you even feel that you were slapped. That would be very, very, that would be like a coerce your body. Okay, this system is very sensitive to stimuli. Very, very sensitive. Okay, the moment you are, yes, please.
Please, I want to ask something.
Yes, ask your question.
Sometimes you will be cut by something, maybe a sharp object or something,
Okay,
but
all
you will
right.
not realize it too.
Okay,
It will be like 3-4 days before you see the scar. That is when you
okay.
know that you have been cut by something. What happened?
It could be that during the process of the injury, during the time the injury was happening, your concentration was on something else. It could
Okay.
be that you were so euphoric that probably your attention was on something else, such that you couldn't sense that you had an injury. Now, but the fact that after some time you are still able to sense that there is an injury, it tells you that the nervous system is working. So it could be that during the time the injury was occurring, your attention was on something else. Yes, so in such a situation, probably you couldn't detect it that early because your attention was on something else. Okay, great. Yes, but all things being equal, if you are very alert, not divided attention, and something should touch your body, you sense it, you detect it. Now, in a situation where you have problems detecting stimulus, it could be you have a nervous problem. And you can confirm that from patients who have stroke. So if patients are having nervous system problems, like a stroke, okay, sometimes they lose sensation, especially sensation to touch. Some of them may not even be able to hear. Some of them may also lose motor signals or motor input roles, and they may not be able to raise certain parts of their body, or they may lose control over certain parts of their body. Some of them may not even be able to swallow. Okay, and all these problems are coming from nervous system problems. Okay, again, this system coordinates complex responses. This system is also adaptable and plastic. Okay, if you say something is adaptable, this is a system that is capable of reorganizing. Okay, it's capable of reorganizing, because as you are here right now, if you decide to learn something new, your nervous system is adapting. It's trying to adapt before you are able to learn something new. Okay, so this is a system. Imagine that nervous system was not adaptable. What it means is that you may not be able to learn something new, because every new thing that you are learning, the nervous system or the neurons have to adapt before you are able to learn those new things. Is that okay? So we say that this system is a system that is adaptable. Okay, adaptable meaning it is capable of reorganizing and forming new neural connections to help you to learn, to help you to build experience, and to help you to become conscious of yourself. Now, neurons transmit both electrical and chemical signals. We mentioned that earlier on. Neurons transmit both electrical and chemical signals. Okay, great. Now, you remember in urinary system, we mentioned that the basic structural and functional unit of the urinary system is the nephron. Now, when you come to the nervous system, the basic structural and functional unit of the nervous system is the nerve cell or the neuron. Remember, when you hear a nerve, when you hear neuron, or you hear a nerve cell, we are referring to the same thing. Neuron, nerve cell, and nerve, we are referring to the same thing. Don't get confused. There are times we'll be using neuron. There are times we will use nerve cell. There are times we will use a nerve. It's the same thing we are referring to in anatomy. So when we say a neuron, it's just the same as we say a nerve cell or a nerve. It's the same thing. And this nerve cell or a neuron or a nerve is the basic structural and functional unit of the nervous system. So when we ask you, what is the basic structural and functional unit of the nervous system, your answer will be a neuron. Your answer can also be a nerve. Your answer can also be a nerve cell. And this is what we call a nerve cell. A nerve cell. This is a nerve cell. Now, in physiology, when you decide to study anything regarding the functions of the brain, so if you're in physiology class and you are studying the functions of the brain structures like the nerves and their function, the functions of the brain, the functions of the spinal cord, we say that you are learning neurophysiology. Let me go over that again. Anytime you decide to study the functions of nerves, the functions of neurons, the functions of the brain, the functions of the spinal cord, the functions of ganglion, anything structure relating to the nervous system, we say that you are learning neurophysiology or you are doing neurophysiology. So right now, what we are doing now, we are doing neuroanatomy. So when we say neuroanatomy, when you decide to study the structure of the brain, the structure of the spinal cord, and the structure of nerves, we say that you are studying neuroanatomy. But when we say you are studying neurophysiology, meaning you are studying the functions of the brain, the functions of the spinal cord, and the functions of nerves, that is neurophysiology. Okay, so now my question is that, what is neuroanatomy? How will you define or explain neuroanatomy? So when we say neuroanatomy, what does it mean?
It's the study of the
The
brain,
structure
the
of the
cord,
nerve,
nerve.
the
Yes,
brain, the
excellent.
spinal cord, and the
And the
yes,
nerves.
and the
Excellent. So when we ask you to define neuroanatomy, don't talk about functions. You just say the study of the structure of the brain, the spinal cord, and nerves. You are done. If we ask you to define neurophysiology, it's the study of the functions of the brain, functions of the spinal cord, functions of nerves. You are done. That is neurophysiology. Okay, good. Now, let's add some key more terms. What is a ganglion? We've done this already. What is a ganglion? I've explained a ganglion already. When we say a ganglion, what is a ganglion?
It is the multiple of cell body clustered together.
Come again.
I'm saying that it's a multiple of cell body
Okay.
clustered together.
Excellent. That
When,
is great. So when the cell bodies of multiple neurons come together, then they form what we call the ganglion. Where are they usually located? Where are ganglions usually located? Let me put the diagram on to help you. Where are ganglions usually located? I mentioned it in my earlier explanation. Where are ganglions usually located? Yes, who remembers?
the peripheral nervous system.
They are part of the peripheral nervous system, but where are they usually located? At where? From the diagram, you can see it from the diagram where they are located.
throughout the body.
No, but from the diagram, where are you seeing the ganglion located?
Around the spinal cord. Is it
The peripheral nervous system. But where can you see they've pointed the ganglion? Where? from this
It's
diagram?
joined the spinal cord.
Good. So they are
In the
located
spinal cord.
closer to the spinal cord. Is that okay? So
Spinal
most
cord.
ganglions are usually located closer to the spinal cord. Is that okay? So when we say a ganglion, when the cell bodies or the soma, when the cell bodies or the soma of multiple neurons come together, they form what? The ganglion. Where are they
Ganglion.
usually located? Closer to the spinal cord.
To the spinal.
Is that okay? Closer to. You can't say this within the spinal cord. They are closer. Is that okay? So when the nerves are going to attach to the spinal cord, the cell bodies of these nerves usually join together. Okay, and they form the ganglion. So when we say a ganglion is when the cell bodies of multiple neurons come together, then they form what we call a ganglion. Now, is a ganglion part of the CNS or the peripheral nervous system?
So please
It's
read
part
the
of the
definition of
nervous
the
system.
Oh,
The
a
peripheral nervous
ganglion.
system.
Is it part of the CNS or the peripheral nervous system?
The
Peripheral
peripheral
nervous
nervous
system.
system.
Yes, it's part of the peripheral nervous system. Okay, great. Now let's look at the neuron. Before we move on, let's look at a neuron. Let's learn the neuron once and for all. Now, you remember I mentioned that the neuron is the basic structural and functional unit of the nervous system. A neuron is the basic structural and functional unit of the nervous system. Now, this is how a neuron looks like. A typical neuron, this is how it looks like. So we have another one over here too for you to learn. So this is how a neuron looks like. Okay, if we ask you to draw a nerve cell, this is what you draw. If we ask you to draw a nerve, this is what we want you to draw. If we ask you to draw a neuron, this is the same thing we want you to draw. If we ask you to draw a nerve, don't say you don't know a nerve. This is a nerve. If we ask you to draw a nerve cell, this is the diagram we want. And if we ask you to draw a neuron, this is the diagram we are expecting. Okay, now if you look at a typical neuron, it has some key parts. Okay, the key parts, we have the cell body. This part is what we call the cell body. This central part is what we call the cell body. Now, along the cell body, you see some progressions. We call them the dendrites. Okay, so you see we have one dendrite here, we have one dendrite here, we have one dendrite, we have another dendrite, we have another dendrite. Now remember, this cell body, you can also call it a soma. Say soma. Say it after me. Say soma.
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 Excellent. Yes, soma. Or you can call it a cell body. A cell body.
A cell body.
So what that means is that, and within the cell body or within the soma, we have what? We have the nucleus. Okay, so we have the cell body or the soma. Within the soma, we have what? The nucleus. And along the soma, we have some progressions we call what? The dendrites. Say dendrites. Say it after me. Dendrites.
Dendrite.
Excellent. Excellent. Yes. Excellent. Now, if this neuron, you see this neuron, if the neuron have to receive information from another neuron, it receives the information from the dendrite. Okay? Good. If a neuron have to receive information from another neuron, it receives the information from where? The dendrite. Now say this after me. Say a neuron receives information. Say it after me. A neuron receives information.
A neuron
Neuron receives information
Another neuron
from another neuron
using their dendrites.
using their
dendrite.
Now,
A
a
neuron
neuron receives signal from another neuron using their dendrites.
excellent. So that means that if I ask you which part of the neuron helps it to receive information from another neuron, that is the dendrite. So if another neuron have to communicate to this neuron, it will receive the signal through the dendrites. Is that so? You can see the dendrites. We have one over here. 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 We can have one over here. And we have another one over here. Okay. And remember, the dendrites are also connected to what? The cell body. So if I ask you that, where are dendrites located in a typical neuron? What would be your answer? Where are dendrites located in a typical neuron?
And the cell body.
Oh, it's simple. The answer will be they are usually connected to the cell body. Okay, so
Oh,
dendrites are usually connected. So you can see there are progressions that are connected to what? The cell body or the soma. Is that okay? Great. Then we have, so now you've seen the soma. Where do we have the nucleus of a neuron? Where is it located?
it's inside the cell body.
That is a perfect answer. It's inside the cell body. That is a brilliant answer. The nucleus is located inside the cell body or the soma. Okay, great. Now we have the axon. Say axon. Axon. Say it after me. Axon.
Axon.
Excellent. Yeah, so this is what we call axon. From this point to this point, we call it the axon. Is that okay? Axon. So if you label any point from here to here, you can label any point the axon. Is that okay? Great. Now, the junction between the cell body and the axon, we call it the axon hillock. Say axon hillock. Say axon hillock. Say axon hillock. Good. So if we ask you that the junction between the soma and then the axon is known as, what would be your answer? Axon hillock. So here, and you can label that over here. You can label that over here, the axon hillock. Okay, the junction between the cell body and the axon, we call it the axon hillock. Okay, how will you label this part where I'm pointing? Where I'm pointing, how will you label it? Look at where I'm pointing now. Look at where I'm pointing now. How will you label that part? Yes, axon hillock. Yes, axon hillock. Axon hillock. Okay. All name will you give to the direction of movement, the part that the cursor is moving along? What name will you give to that part?
Axon.
The axon, yes. The axon, please, not the axon hillock. When we say the axon hillock, we will not be moving on. It's just a junction between the cell body and the axon. But this is the axon. From this point to this point is the axon. From this point to this point is the axon. Now, at the end of the axon, we have the axon terminals or nerve endings. Say after me, axon terminals or nerve endings. Say axon terminals or nerve endings. Yes, let's go again. Say axon terminals or nerve endings.
Axon terminals or nerve endings.
So we have axon terminals or nerve endings. Now let's look at the axon. On the axon, we have what we call myelin sheath. Say myelin sheath.
Myelin
sheath.
Myelin sheath.
Have the myelin sheath. Other neurons do not. We have some neurons that have the myelin sheath. Other neurons do not. Now, the neurons that have the myelin sheath, they communicate information faster. The neurons that do not have the myelin sheath, transmission of signals is very slow. Okay. Now, neurons that have myelin sheath, within the myelin sheath, we have a cell there we call the Schwann cells. The Schwann cells. Okay. And in between the myelin sheath, we have what we call the node of Ranvier. Node of Ranvier, or you can say node of Ranvier. So we have the node of Ranvier. Here we have another node of Ranvier. We have another node of Ranvier. Now, my question is that if a neuron is not having a myelin sheath, will it have node of Ranvier?
No, please.
No. Okay. Again, if a neuron is not having a myelin sheath, will it have a node of Renvi?
No, please. No, please.
Excellent. And we can use that to ask you a simple question that, okay, a neuron without a neuron, so I can ask a question that, okay, a neuron without a myelin sheath will lack one of the following, except, listen to the question very well. A neuron without a node of Renvi will lack one of the following, except, then the response, A, node of Renvi, B, squam cells, and then C, dendrites. Let me go over the question again before you respond. A neuron without a myelin sheath will lack one of the following, except A, node of Renvi, B, squam cells, and then C, dendrites. What would be your answer?
Dendrites.
Simple questions. Okay, again, if the options are to be 4, I can say that a neuron without a myelin sheath would lack one of the following structures, except then we would have the myelin sheath itself will be there, or I can even say myelin, or myelin sheath itself will be there, the squam cells will be there, the node of Renvi will be there, then I'll bring an axon. What will be your answer? Here, this time it will be what? An axon. Is that okay? Great. All right. That is fine. That is fine. What is the name? How do you call this one? Where I'm pointing now.
Neuron terminal. Axon
terminal.
Yes, axon terminals, non-neuron terminal. Or you can call it nerve endings.
Nerve terminal. Okay.
Nerve endings. Nerve endings. Okay? Either you call it axon terminals or nerve endings. Or in some textbooks, they will label this part synapse, but this place is not synapse. Keep it in your mind. When we say a synapse is the junction where two or more neurons meet. That is a synapse. Now, apart from the nerve ending and the axon terminal, you can also call this area, you can call it the synaptic knobs. Say synaptic knobs.
Synaptic knobs.
Say synaptic knobs.
Synaptic knobs.
Say synaptic knobs.
Synaptic knobs.
Synaptic knobs.
Synaptic knobs.
Excellent. Yes. Yes, excellent. So you can either call it synaptic knobs, okay, or you can call it axon terminals, or you can call it nerve endings. Now, the interesting thing is that, see, when these dendrites receive, let's assume this neuron have to communicate to another neuron. Please pay attention here, very important. It will receive the information through what? If this neuron have to receive information from the another neuron, the information will come through which part of the neuron? Yes.
Dendrite.
Dendrite. So the information will come through the dendrite, then it will come through the axon hillock, then it will come through the axon, and it will flow. Now, when it gets over here, now, as the information is coming from the dendrite or it's electrical signal. So from here coming to the axon, it's electrical signal. When it gets to the axon terminals, they are converted into chemicals. And so within these axon terminals, we have neurotransmitters. Say this after me. Within the axon terminals, we have neurotransmitters. Say it after me. Within axon terminals, we have neurotransmitters.
Within axon terminals, we have neurotransmitters.
Within axon terminals, we have neurotransmitters.
Within axon
terminal,
we have neurotransmitters.
That is excellent. The nature of your sound is letting me appreciate the variations in the networks we have in Ghana. Some of you, your sound comes so slow. Yes, it's fine. Okay, so within the axon terminals, we have the neurotransmitters. Within the axon terminals, we have the neurotransmitters. Okay, Good. So when the information is coming from the dendrites down to the axon terminal, it's still electrical. So the moment the information gets to the axon terminals, it becomes a neurotransmitter. You know what that means? If this neuron have to now release the information to another neuron, it will release it through the axon terminals. But when it is releasing, it will release it as a chemical information. So if you remember, when we started by establishing that the nervous system communicates using electrical and chemical signals. It doesn't communicate using electrical signals alone. Is that okay? So when the information is picked by the dendrite, the stimulus is coming like electrical stimulus. The electrical stimulus is walking along the axon. But the moment it gets to the axon terminal, it is converted into what? Neurotransmitters. Is that so? If this neuron have to send the signal to another neuron, it will release the neurotransmitters into the synapse. When we say a synapse is the junction where two or more neurons meet. So just think about it, that if we were having the dendrite of another neuron here, just imagine it in your mind that we were having the dendrite of another neuron over here. So if there was a dendrite of another neuron over here, it means that the junction where the axon terminal of this neuron and the dendrite of the other neuron is meeting, that is what we call the synapse. Now, the space between that junction in anatomy, that is what we call the synaptic cleft. Say synaptic cleft. Say synaptic cleft.
Synaptic cleft.
Synaptic cleft.
Cleft, as in cleft palate. I don't know if you've seen the word cleft palate, as in cleft. So the space at the junction where two or more neurons meet, okay, that space is what we call the synaptic cleft. Is that so? So just imagine that this neuron, it was here. The dendrite was at this area, or the cell body was here. The junction where the two are meeting is what we call synapse. Now, the space within the junction is what we call synaptic cleft. Let me see whether I have that diagram. I have a diagram that shows the synaptic cleft. So you see, so here, what you are seeing over here, this diagram, it's like we've taken one of the axon terminals. This diagram, the diagram I showed you, it's like we've taken one of this axon terminal. We've taken just one of them. That is what we are showing over here. This one. It's like we've taken just one of them. Is that okay? We've taken one of the axon terminals. Okay, so you see, this is the axon terminal. You see the neurotransmitters are here. So if we ask you where are the neurotransmitters located, where are the neurotransmitters located? They are within the axon terminal. Is that okay? Can you see the synaptic cleft? Can you see the synaptic cleft? Yes, so this is the synaptic cleft. The space between the axon terminals, or the space between the two neurons at a synapse. That is what we call the synaptic cleft. Is that okay? All right, that is fine. Okay, so now you know the main structures in a typical neuron. We have the cell body, we have the dendrites, and the axon. These are the key structures, and we can ask you that in anatomy. That what are the key parts of a typical neuron? The dendrite, the cell body, and the axon. The dendrites, the cell body, and the axon. These are the key parts of a typical neuron. But apart from the key parts, we have the axon hillock. We have some neurons that along the axon, they have a myelin sheath. Okay. Now, what is the difference? What is the difference between a neuron with a myelin sheath and a neuron without a myelin sheath?
The one with the myelin sheath sends signals faster than the one without the myelin sheath.
That is excellent. But that is not the only difference in anatomy. And that is not the only difference in anatomy. I want you to give me an anatomical answer.
Please, the question again.
Okay, it's very simple though. The question is very simple because you've been able to answer it correctly by saying that the one with the myelin sheath communicates signals faster. That is correct, but that is more like physiology. What's the difference between a neuron that is having a myelin sheath and the one without?
The one with myelin sheath has a squam cell, and then the one without myelin sheath doesn't have.
That is excellent. What is your name?
Myelin sheath. Hey.
Yes, it's simple. The neuron is here. If the neuron with the myelin sheath would, of course, would have the node of Rinva and a squam cell. And anatomy is the easiest part too. Anatomy is very easy. What you see is what you are saying. Okay, if a neuron is not having the myelin sheath, of course, it's going to lack the squam cells and the node of Rinva. That is the difference. And a neuron with a myelin sheath would have the node of Rinva and the squam cells. Simple difference. Good. Then if you want to talk about the physiological aspect, then you add that, okay, the neuron with the myelin sheath would coordinate impulses faster. Okay, and the neuron without the myelin sheath will coordinate impulses slower. Is that okay? Simple as that. Okay, great. All right, that is fine. So know the parts, learn how to draw the neuron and label it correctly. So the neuron, the cell body, within the cell body we have the nucleus. Along the cell body we have the dendrite. We have the axon. Here we have the axon hillock. Along the axon we have the myelin sheath. In between the myelin sheath we have the node of Rinva. Is that okay? That is fine. Good. So basically that is it. Now another thing that I can do is that I can give you a diagram with with two neurons. One will have a myelin sheath, the other will not have a myelin sheath. Then I'll ask you to look at the diagram and give us some differences. All that we want you to say is that, oh, the one with the myelin sheath will send impulses faster. The one with the myelin sheath has the squam cells. It also has the node of Rinva. The one without the myelin sheath will lack node of Rinva. It will also lack squam cells. You are done. That is it. You are done. Is that okay? All right. That is fine. Which part of the neuron can we locate the neurotransmitters? The axon terminals.
Yeah.
The axon terminals.
Yes.
Is that okay? The axon. Which part of the neurons can we locate the squam cells?
The myelin sheath.
Within the myelin sheath. Within the myelin sheath. Is that okay? Within the myelin sheath. Okay. If a neuron have to send an information to another neuron, which part of the neuron would be used? If a neuron have to send, hey, madam, listen to the question very well. Oh. Some of you, that's the problem you have. In your eye, I observe some of you are very intelligent, but you don't pay attention to the questions. Anatomy can be very simple, but you always have to pay attention to the question. Okay. Which part, if a neuron have to send information to another neuron, which part of the neuron will be used? It's not the dendrite. Is that okay? Yes, it's the axon terminal. Yes. So if a neuron have to receive from another neuron, which part will be used?
Dendrite.
That is when you say the dendrite. Is that okay? Yes, that is when you say the dendrite. Okay, that is fine. So now you can draw the neuron, right? You can draw the neuron.
Yes.
Yes. So practice how to draw. Practice how to draw the neuron yourself. Is that okay? It's a very important part of the nervous system. Is that okay? Okay, that is fine. That is fine. Now we have different types of neurons too. We have different types of neurons, and we have different types of neurons based on the structure of the neuron. Okay, we have what we call a unipolar neuron. Say it after me: unipolar neuron.
Unipolar
neuron.
Bipolar neuron.
Multipolar neuron.
Neuron.
Anazonic neurons.
Anazonic
Anazonic
neuron.
neuron. Anazonic neuron.
Unipolar neuron.
Unipolar neuron. Unipolar
Bipolar
neuron.
neuron.
Bipolar neuron.
Hmm.
Multipolar neuron. Anazonic.
So we have about 4 different types or forms of neurons based on the structure of the neuron. Okay, now let's look at it from the diagram. Now, in fact, there's difference. You do it in exams. Clearly, I will let you know. There's very different types of neurons. You do it in exams. It could be
Okay.
that I will let you draw the different types of neurons. It could be that I will let you write the differences. Or it could be that I'll give you the neurons and ask you that, okay, label. I can just cut the diagram and give it to you. I'll just cut the diagram and I'll tell you, I'll name this one A, B, C, D. Then I'll tell you to write the names according to how the neurons have been labeled. So if A, you think A is a unipolar neuron, you write it. You think B is a bipolar neuron, you write it. C is a multipolar neuron, you write it. It's an anazonic neuron, you write it. Now let's go into the meaning. Let's start with a unipolar neuron. Now in a unipolar neuron, we have a cell body. Okay, we have a pole rising from a cell. So it has a single pole from the cell body that divides to give you the dendrite pole and then the axonal pole. Listen to it again. In a unipolar neuron, we have a single pole arising from the cell body, and that single pole branches to give us the dendrites and then branches to give us the axon. Say this after me. In a unipolar neuron,
A unipolar.
there's a single pole rising from the cell body.
There is
There's a single pole rising.
arise from the
Branches to give the dendrites
that branches to give the dendrites.
and the axon.
The
Neuron.
In a unipolar neuron.
Single pole or process
Single pole of process.
to give the dendrites
Dendrite and the
axon.
axon.
Excellent. So you see the unipolar, there is a single pole over here. There is a single pole on the cell body that branches to form the dendrites and branches to form the axon. This one is called what? A unipolar neuron. Okay, so if I can ask you, and I can use this one for MCQ. So a neuron that have a single process or a pole rising from the cell body and branching to give the dendrite and then the axon is known as, then you write either unipolar, bipolar. What you think is the answer, you write. So you see here, there is a single pole rising from, or a single process from the cell body that branches to form the dendrite and branches to form what? The axon. This is a unipolar neuron. Yes, one of you should define unipolar neuron. One of you should define unipolar neuron.
You say is the neuron. A unipolar neuron. There's a single pole or process rises to give the dendrite and the axon.
That is excellent. That is excellent. So there is a single pole from the cell body that branches to give what? The dendrite, and that also branches to form the axon. Now let's look at the bipolar. So see, look at the bipolar. So you see the bipolar, there is one pole. We have one pole forming the axon and one pole forming the dendrites. So look at this very well. You see, we have one pole forming the axon and one pole, just one pole from the cell body, also going to form the dendrites. Okay, this one we call it the bipolar neuron. So say it after me. In a bipolar neuron.
In
In
a
a
bipolar,
bipolar neuron,
One pole forms the axon,
one
one
pole
pole
forms
forms the
the
axon,
axon,
and another pole forms the dendrite.
and
and
another pole
another
forms
pole
the
forms the
So how
dendrite.
many poles are connected to the cell body? In how
two.
many poles? Just two
Two.
poles.
Two.
Is that okay? We have two
Yes,
poles
please.
connected to the cell body. How many poles are connected to the cell body of a unipolar neuron?
One.
One.
One. Excellent. Okay, so we have two poles in a bipolar. We have two poles. One of the poles will form the dendrite. One of the poles will form the axon. In a unipolar, we have one pole connected to the cell body, and that same pole will branch to give us the dendrite, and that same pole will also branch to give us what? The axon. Let's come to the multipolar. Now, this time I won't explain. I want you to look at the diagram yourself and tell me what you are seeing with the multipolar neuron. With the multipolar neuron. This is the multipolar neuron. What are you seeing and how different it is from the bipolar?
It has many poles connected
Well,
to the dendrite.
Person to respond so that we can all follow and then have a very sound discussion. Yes, who want to give us the description?
Okay, I will try.
Okay, try.
It has one pole that is connecting, that forms the axon. One
Okay,
pole from the axon connecting to multiple poles on the dendrite.
not completely correct. Please come again.
It has one pole of the axon
Okay,
connecting to multiple poles to the dendrite.
not
Sorry.
true. Not completely correct.
He
Not
said
completely correct.
we have
Yes,
one zone
So
and
it's
multiple dendrites.
and then it has one axon.
say it.
It has
Yes,
one
it's not about the multiple dendrites. That's not how you are supposed to put it. Oh. We have one pole forming the axon. No, you see, you people are trying to describe what is not in the diagram. Oh. What you people have described, the two of it, that is not the diagram. Check it very well. We have one pole forming the axon and multiple poles forming the
Axon.
dendrites. You are describing what is not there. Okay, look at the diagram. Here is it. There is one pole forming the axon and multiple poles forming the dendrites. That is why we call it a multipolar neuron. So we have one pole. You see, this is one pole forming the axon. And then we have multiple poles forming the dendrites. Is that okay? That is what we call a multipolar neuron. So there is one pole forming the axon, but multiple poles forming the dendrites. Is that if you come over here, the bipolar, you see one pole forming the axon, one pole forming the dendrites. Is that okay? If you come to multipolar, one pole forming the axon, multiple poles forming the dendrites. Is that okay? That is why we call it the multipolar neuron. Okay. Now, if you come over here, the anasonic neuron, what can you say about it? Yes. What can you say about it? The anasonic neuron.
Has no
Has no
axon,
only
but
dendrites.
multiple dendrites.
That is not how I want you to say it. Oh. You should be using the poles.
it has multiple poles with multiple more
Good.
dendrites.
Yes, this is the perfect answer. Anatomy, we want perfect things. So, yes, we have multiple poles forming the dendrites, but there is no pole forming the axon.
axon.
Is that okay? Or you can say it has no axon, but multiple poles forming what? The dendrite. And that's why we call it anazonic what? Neuron. Anazonic neuron. Is that okay? Yes. So practically this type of neuron has no axon. Is that okay? And we can ask you a question that what is the difference between okay, let's do this. What is the difference between a multipolar neuron and anazonic neuron? What's the difference between a multipolar neuron and anazonic neuron?
Multipolar neuron has no axon,
Okay.
but the anazonic neuron has.
Yes.
The
Multipolar
multipolar
neuron has no
neuron
axon.
has one axon,
Uh-huh.
but the anazonic neuron has no axon.
Okay, that is fine. That is very good. Yes. So a multipolar neuron has an axon. In addition to the axon, it has multiple poles forming the dendrite. You should have added that. When you come to the anazonic neuron, there are multiple poles forming the dendrite, but it lacks an axon. Simple as that. So anazonic neuron lacks an axon, but then we have multiple poles forming the dendrites. If you come to the multipolar neuron, we have multiple poles forming the dendrites. Then we have just one pole forming the axon, and this one is having an axon. Is that okay? Great.
Okay.
Great. All right, that is fine. So now you are masters of the neurons. You know what neurons are. You know the parts of a typical neuron. You know where we can find neurotransmitters. You know the difference between a neuron with a myelin sheath and a neuron without a myelin sheath. You know the various types of neurons. All right, that is fine. Now let's look at, before we look at the divisions of a neuron, let's go through this. Now, neurons basically have three key properties. Every neuron has three key properties. The first one is excitability. The second one is conductivity. And the third one is secretion. Say it after me. Excitability. Say excitability.
Excitability.
Conductivity.
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 And the last one, secretions.
Secretion.
One more time. Excitability.
Excitability. Conductivity.
Conductivity.
Secretion.
The excitability, conductivity, and secretions. Now, when we say a neuron can be excited, or when we say excitability, it simply means the ability of a neuron to respond to a stimuli. For example, if we should touch your skin, you feel it. It means that your neurons have been excited. They are able to respond to the stimuli. That property is what we call excitability. Okay, so the ability of a neuron to respond to a stimuli. Okay, now as you are watching your phone right now, your neurons are being excited. Either than that, you wouldn't see the screen you are looking at. Okay, the only reason why you're able to see the screen is that your neurons are being excited. They are responding to the stimuli. So the light rays that are traveling to your eyes, they are stimuli. Okay, and your neurons are responding to them. Okay, that ability for neurons to respond to stimuli is what we call excitability. Now, when we say conductivity, the ability of a neuron to send signal from one part of the neuron to another is what we call conductivity. So you see, if this neuron receives signal from the dendrites, the signal will not be here. The electrical signal will not remain here. It will move from this part of the neuron to another part. So from one point to the neuron to another point on the neuron. That is what we call conductivity. The ability of a neuron to send signal from one part of the neuron to another point on the neuron is what we call conductivity. Okay, then we have secretions. Do you remember we mentioned that at the axon terminals, some chemicals are released? What chemicals are that? At the axon terminals, some chemicals are there. What chemicals are that? What's the name of the chemicals at the axon terminals? that will help the neuron to communicate to another neuron. What is the name of the chemicals within the axon terminals? Neurotransmitters. Is that okay? Now, so it means that when a neuron gets to the axon terminals, before it will be able to communicate to another neuron, it will have to release the neurotransmitters. So for the ability of a neuron to secrete or release the neurotransmitters to enable it communicate to another cell or another neuron is what we call secretion. The ability of a neuron to release its neurotransmitters to enable it to communicate with other neurons, that is what we call secretion. So when we say secretion, is the ability of a neuron, after the signals have gotten to the axon terminals and it has been transmitted into the neurotransmitter, the ability of the neuron to release its neurotransmitters, that property is what we call secretions. Now, I can ask you that what are the three properties
Sir, please, can you come again?
Okay. Yes, when we say secretions, do neurons secrete neurotransmitters? Neurons, do they secrete neurotransmitters?
Yes.
Which part of the neuron secretes neurotransmitters?
In the axon terminal.
The axon terminals. Now, simple. The ability of the axon terminal of the neuron to secrete neurotransmitters, that is what we call secretion. The ability of the neurotransmitters within the axon terminal. So the ability of the neuron to release its neurotransmitters, that is what we call the secretion. So when we say a neuron has the property of secretion, it means that a neuron, when it is carrying electrical signals, when they get to the axon terminals, they secrete the neurotransmitters. Is that okay? Good. That is what we call secretion. So when we say secretion, the ability of a neuron to release neurotransmitters to enable it to communicate to other neurons. Now, what is a sensory neuron? We've discussed this already. What is a sensory neuron? What is a sensory neuron?
You said they are the neuron that sends signal from the other part of the body to the central nervous system.
That is 100% correct. Neurons that send signal from all parts of the body towards the central nervous system, meaning specifically towards the brain and the spinal cord. How about interneurons? What are interneurons?
They are responsible for memory, decision making, and basically responsible for processing information.
That's the best way of defining interneurons. This is the best. They are neurons. So if I ask you interneuron, don't come and write interneurons are neurons between two neurons. I may mark it wrong. If you don't add details, I'll mark it wrong because you can have sensory neurons between two neurons as well. So that is not entirely anatomy. Is that okay?
It's responsible for integration.
Come again?
Can someone say it is responsible for integration?
Yes, it's also correct. Just that you have left the other part. That's why I mentioned that her definition is the best because she has given all the details of interneuron. Don't say one. No. Don't say one. Add all. So when you are learning, try and learn it in detail. So it's responsible for processing, integration, decision-making, and coordination. The best. But if you say it's responsible for integration, at least you've said something is good. Is that okay? Yes. Just that we want you to be a bit more detailed. So what are interneurons? These are neurons that are responsible for processing information, integrating information, decision-making, and coordination. Then you can add that they are usually between, or they are sometimes between two neurons. Do you get it? Don't go and say interneurons are neurons that are always, they are in between two neurons. It's a lie. Yes, because you can have a sensory neuron too that is between two sensory neurons. Okay, yes. So you always have to communicate your information well. Okay, good. And you can have a motor neuron that is also between two motor neurons. Is that okay? Yes. So you have to communicate your information. Okay, what is a motor neuron? When we say a motor neuron, what is a motor neuron?
They are the neuron that transfer information from the CNS to the other parts of the body.
That is 100% correct. These are neurons that are bringing signals from the CNS, which is the brain and spinal cord, to other parts of the body. Okay, simple as that. So when we ask you, so I can just ask you a simple question. Okay, explain the 3 different types of neurons. Okay, now remember, if you are not careful, you confuse the types of neurons with the forms of neurons. If I'm asking you a question on the structure, the forms of neurons based on their structure, I'll be very clear. I'll say that, okay, outline or state the different forms of neurons based on their structure. That one, don't go and write the sensory neuron, interneurons, and motor neurons. Okay, so that one I'll be very specific that outline the different forms of neurons based on their structure. Then that one you are going to talk about the unipolar neuron, the bipolar neuron, the multipolar neuron, and azonic neuron. But when we say that, state the types of neurons: 3: sensory neurons, interneurons, motor neurons. Is that okay? Great. Then we have, every system, if you remember very well, when you were learning circulatory system, you were learning about the blood. You mentioned that we have a certain blood cell that plays the role of protection. Which cell in the blood plays the role of protection? Which cell inside the blood plays the role of protection? White blood cells. Now, in nervous system too, we have some cells that plays the role of protection. We call them the neoglial cells. Say neoglial cells. Say neoglial cells. Or glial cells. Say glial cells. Say it again. Neoglial cells. Say neoglial cells. Or you can say glial cells. Excellent. Good. So glial cells in the nervous system, they play the role of what we call support. They support. Their functions are like supportive functions. So within the nervous system, we have neurons. But the neurons they are more like policemen inside the nervous system. Let's keep it that way. Or let's say they are more like security personnel inside the nervous system. All they do is that they protect the neurons. They protect the neurons, or they protect the nerves. We call them neoglial cells. Now, if you are not careful, you may think that this is the same as the ganglion. This is not ganglion. Glial cells or neoglial cells are the protective cells in the nervous system. And we have different types of glial cells. Is that okay? We have different types of glial cells. So when we say a glial cell or a neoglial cell, these are caretakers. So you see the word that I use over here. They are caretakers. Is that okay? It's like they protect your neurons. Yes, there should be something to protect your neurons. Yes, so that your neurons can last longer and work for you. Is that okay? And you see, the interesting thing is that the glial cells are even more. So check. In terms of their abundance, glial cells are 50:1, meaning where we have 50 glial cells, we have 1 neuron. That tells you how important your glial cells are. Is that okay? So you can see. So there are about 1 trillion neurons in the nervous system, 10 times as many neurons in your body as there are stars in our galaxy. Yet glial cells make up over half of brain's volume. Is that okay? And outnumber neurons by up to 50:1. That is very serious. So it tells you when you take 50 glial cells, we have 1 neuron. Very, very serious information. And that tells you how important the glial cells and how important or sensitive your nervous system is. We want to protect your neurons. So when you take, and this ratio is very important in anatomy. This ratio, the ratio between glial cells and the neurons, 50:1. Is that okay? 50:1. Now let's look at some examples. Now, before we proceed to the examples, what are glial cells or what are neoglial cells? Yes, what are neoglial cells?
They are responsible for protecting. They're responsible in protecting the cells in the. No, they are responsible. They are protective nerves. They are protective cells.
No, it's incomplete. if you say glial cells are protective cells, it's
Yeah,
incomplete.
now
They are responsible in protecting the cells in the nervous system.
You are now giving us the definition of glial cells. If you say they are protective cells, it can be the white blood cells. Okay, so you can say they are protective cells in the nervous system, or they are caretakers and protective cells for neurons. So when we ask you what are glial cells, don't go and say they are protective cells. Oh. Protective cells can also be white blood cells. They can be any other cell that that gives protective roles or that performs protective roles. Glial cells are protective cells in the nervous system, or they are protective cells for what? Your neurons. Now,
There.
yes, please. Yes,
So please,
please.
can you say they support the nervous system?
That is also correct. They support the nervous system, or they provide support for the nervous system, or you can say they are caretakers of the nervous system. That is glial cells. Now we have glial cells in the CNS, and we have glial cells in the peripheral nervous system. This is also an examinable area in anatomy. Yes, I want us to do this. Say it after me. Glial cells in the central nervous system. Let's go. Glial cells in the central nervous system.
Glial cells in the
eye
central
cells
nervous
in the
system.
central nervous system.
Dendrocytes, oligodendrocytes,
Oligodendrocytes.
Oligodendrocytes,
Astrocytes.
astrocytes,
astrocytes,
Astrocytes.
astrocytes,
ependymal cells.
Ependymal
ependymal
cells.
cells,
Lastly, microglia. Microglia. Say
Ma-
microglia.
Microglia.
microglia,
It will deal with you. Oh. Yes. So the glial cells in the central nervous system, they are 4. Please pay attention. The glial cells in the central nervous system, they are 4. And you would have an MCQ. You would always have an MCQ question on this area. You can note it down. You'd always have an MCQ question, usually 2 from this area. So we will say that, okay, one of the following is a glial cell in the central nervous system, except one of the following, or the following are glial cells in the central nervous system, except, then I'll bring oligodendrocytes, astrocytes, microglia. Then I'll bring satellite cells. What will be your answer?
satellite cells,
Satellite cells. Okay, then we have glial cells in the peripheral nervous system. We have the squam cells, we have the satellite cells. Okay, so these are the glial cells or neoglial cells in the peripheral nervous system. So we have the squam cells and we have the satellite cells. Let's say this together. Glial cells in the peripheral nervous system.
Glial cells
eye
In the
cells
in the
in the
peripheral
peripheral nervous
peripheral nervous system,
cells.
eye cells,
Satellite cells.
Satellite
satellite
cells.
cells,
Yes.
Glial cells
eye
in
cells
the
The
central
in the
nervous system.
peripheral
peripheral
nervous
nervous
system.
squam cells,
Cells. Satellite
satellite
cells.
cells.
So let me ask you, mention the glial cells in the central nervous system, or state the glial cells in the central nervous system. What would be your answer?
Oligodendrocytes,
Yes.
Astrocytes.
astrocytes,
Yes.
e-
Cells.
Epidermal cells.
epidermal cells,
Ependymal cells.
microglia,
Ependymal.
Epidermal cells.
ependymal cells,
Epidermal cells.
Excellent. And then
Microglia.
Microglia cells.
Microglia cells.
Microglia.
microglia. Okay,
microglia,
that is fine.
microglia,
That is fine. Okay, mention the glial cells or neoglial cells in the peripheral nervous system.
the
Squam
squam
cells.
cells,
And satellite cells.
satellite cells,
Let's look at some possible questions I can ask over here. Which of the following is a neoglial cell in the which of the following is a neoglial cell in the peripheral nervous system? A. Microglial cells. B. Astrocytes. C. Oligodendrocytes. D. Squam cells. What would be your answer?
D.
Squam
Squam
cells.
cells.
Cells. Yes, please. Someone wanted to ask a question? Okay, that is fine. So now you know that we have glial cells or neoglial cells. They are protective cells. Some are inside the CNS. Okay, another way I can ask you this question is that state 2 glial cells in the brain, or state 2 glial cells in the brain and spinal cord. What would be your answer?
Astrocytes and epidermal.
Say astrocytes and ependymal cells. Why did you say that?
Because
Because they are found in the central nervous system.
This means you are applying the knowledge. Okay, yes, this means you are applying the knowledge. Okay, what if I ask you that, okay, state 2 nucleoglial cells in the nerves and ganglion cells? What would be your answer?
The
Squam
squam
cells
cells
and satellite
and
cells.
satellite cells.
Why do you say that? Why do you say that? Because
Because
the
they are
ganglion and then the nerves forms the peripheral nervous system.
one nervous
Yes.
system.
Okay. Okay. Now let's look at the oligodendrocyte. Now let's look at the meaning of these neoglial cells. When we say oligodendrocytes are glial cells in the central nervous system. They form the myelin sheath. So the neurons inside the central nervous system, some of them have the myelin sheath. It's the oligodendrocytes that forms the myelin sheath along the axons of the neurons in the central nervous system. Then we have the astrocytes. Okay, now all the neoglial cells inside the central nervous system, the astrocytes are the most abundant. And please write this also somewhere. It's also something important in anatomy that if we should examine nervous system, we can ask questions on. Okay, the most abundant neoglial cell in the central nervous system, that is the astrocytes. Okay, that's the most abundant. Is that okay? Now the astrocytes, all they do is that they form what we call the blood-brain barrier. Say blood-brain barrier. Say it after me. Blood-brain barrier.
Blood-brain barrier.
Blood-brain barrier is like a barrier that sieves or protects or controls the blood that is moving into your brain from your heart. The blood that is moving to your brain. There is a barrier there. Is that okay? The astrocytes, they make sure that the blood moving into your brain, they are clean. Is that okay? They are clean. They form the blood-brain barrier. Is that okay? And they are the most abundant neoglial cells in the central nervous system. Then we have the ependymal cells. The ependymal cells, they line the brain ventricles. And you see, in your body, we have a membrane surrounding your brain and spinal cord. We call it the meninges. Say meninges. Say it after me. Say meninges.
Meninges. Meninges.
Meninges. Meninges. Meninges.
Meninges.
The meninges
Meninges.
is a membrane surrounding your brain and the spinal cord. Now, within that membrane, we have a fluid there. We call it cerebrospinal fluid. Okay. Now, that fluid have to circulate around the entire membrane surrounding your brain and spinal cord. It is this cell that makes sure the cerebrospinal fluid circulates properly. And that is also an important anatomical feature. We can ask you that, okay, which of the neoglial cells facilitates circulation of cerebrospinal fluid? We can ask you, which of the neoglial cells facilitates the smooth circulation of cerebrospinal fluid? Then your answer will be ependymal cells. Okay, we can ask you, which of the neoglial cells are the most abundant and help to form the blood-brain barrier? What will be your answer?
Astrocytes.
Astrocytes. Which of the neoglial cells forms the myelin sheath for the neurons in the CNS? What will be your answer? Oligodendrocytes. Now let's do the last one. Now we have a special neoglial cells. They are usually called them the policemen. all they do is that they remove debris, they remove infection, they remove dirt from the brain. We call them the microglia cells. Okay, they are more like macrophages. If you remember in Anatomy 1, when they were teaching you passive and active transport, you came across something we call macrophages. We have something we call macrophages. Macrophages, they have that ability. Did they teach you phagocytosis? Did you learn phagocytosis?
Yes.
Yes, you came across phagocytosis. Yes, macrophages, they play the role of what we call phagocytosis. They are phagocytic cells. Is that okay? So they help to remove pathogens. They help to remove damaged cells in the brain and spinal cord. Okay, so we can ask you that, okay, which neuroglia cell in the central nervous system help to circulate cerebrospinal fluid? What will be your answer?
Ependymal cells.
Ependymal cells. Then we can ask you, which of the neuroglia cells in the central nervous system help to remove debris and pathogens from the brain? Microglial cells. Now, which of the neuroglia cells in the CNS is most abundant and help form the blood-brain barrier? What will be your answer? The astrocytes. Is that okay? Now,
Yes, sir.
we also have, so someone, I was expecting you to ask that, okay, sir, you said the myelin sheets in the CNS, the neurons that are in the CNS, their myelin sheets are formed by the oligodendrocytes. How about the neurons that are inside the peripheral nervous system that also have myelin sheets? What forms their myelin sheets? That's the Schwann cells. Is that okay? The Schwann cells, they form myelin sheets around neurons in the peripheral nervous system. So if we ask you, okay, what forms myelin sheets for neurons in the central nervous system? That is oligodendrocytes. What forms myelin sheets for neurons in the peripheral nervous system? That is what? The Schwann cells. Is that okay? That's the Schwann cells. Okay. Now we have the satellite cells. They surround neuron cell bodies in ganglia. Okay, the satellite cells surround neuron cell bodies in ganglia. You remember a ganglia or a ganglion? Do you remember ganglia?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
What is a ganglia? Let me see a ganglia. What does it mean?
When a multiple cell
It's a
body,
cluster of
A
cells.
cluster of neuron cell in the peripheral nervous system.
A cluster of neuronal cell bodies in the peripheral nervous system. Is that okay? Now, every ganglia, we have a structure, a cell surrounding it. That is the satellite cell. Okay, they surround. So I can ask you a simple anatomy question that, where can we locate satellite cells? What will be your answer? They surround the neuron cell bodies in ganglia. Okay, where can we locate satellite cells? What will be your answer?
They surround around
Neuron cell bodies in the ganglia. Excellent. Okay, they surround neuron cell bodies in a ganglia. Is that okay? Okay. Lawrence, is it time? Is our time up now?
No.
Yeah. Yes, it's time.
Hey, no, it's not
It's not
time.
yet time.
It's time.
Time. The class
No.
will end 7:20.
7:20. Okay, so we have about 20 minutes more. The 20
Yes,
minutes
20
more.
more minutes.
Let's do the divisions. Let's end with this slide. Is that okay?
Okay.
Let's end with the
Okay, sir.
divisions of the nervous system. Yes, let's end with the divisions of the nervous system. Hopefully, tomorrow we'll be able to finish with the nervous system. Then I'll give you all the possible areas that you can expect questions from in the nervous system, so that quickly you can start revising those areas. Okay, so now the anatomical divisions of the nervous system. The anatomical divisions of the nervous system. Now, the nervous system, let's use the diagram to make it simple. The nervous system have two main divisions. Now, remember, some of you, the access group, your IE, this came into your exams. The regular group, you didn't have the chance to do this in your IE. The access group, this came into their IE. I can repeat it again in exams because it's a very important thing in anatomy. the divisions of the nervous system. The divisions of the nervous system. What are the two main divisions of the nervous system?
The
The
nervous
peripheral
system
nervous
and the
system.
peripheral nervous system.
And then the peripheral nervous system. What forms the central nervous system?
The brain and
The brain and
the
cord. The
spinal
brain
cord.
and the spinal cord.
The peripheral nervous system.
The ganglia.
The nerves
Well,
and
Okay.
Ganglia.
All nerves in your body and the ganglia outside
plus
of
the
the
ganglion.
CNS. Is that okay? So that's the two broad division. Okay. Now we have two divisions under the peripheral nervous system. So the peripheral nervous system, the central nervous system cannot be further divided. So the central nervous system, under it we have the brain and spinal cord, but the peripheral nervous system can be further divided. Okay, the peripheral nervous system. So say this after me. The central nervous system consists of the brain and spinal cord. Say it after me. The central nervous system consists
Central
of the
nervous
brain and the spinal cord.
The central
Central
nervous
nervous system
nervous
consists of
system
the brain and the
consists of the
spinal
brain and
cord.
the spinal cord.
Nervous system consists of all nerves and ganglia.
The peripheral
nervous
nervous
system
system consists of
consists
all
of all
nerves
nerves
and
and the
ganglia.
ganglia.
Sorry, didn't hear.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, so say it after me that the peripheral nervous system can be further divided.
The peripheral
The
nervous
peripheral nervous
The
system
peripheral
can
can
be
be
further
nervous
further
system
divided.
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 Peripheral nervous system can be further divided. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, sir.
Excellent. So the peripheral nervous system can be further divided into two. We have the sensory or efferent division and the motor or efferent division. So say it after me. The peripheral nervous system can be further divided into
The
The peripheral
peripheral
nervous
nervous
system
system
can
can
be
be
further
further
divided
divided
into
into
sensory or efferent division. The sensory or efferent
sensory
division.
or efferent
the
division,
sensory or the efferent
or efferent
division,
division,
Motor or efferent division.
and the motor
motor
or the
or
efferent
efferent
division.
division.
Let me explain this point. Now you see the peripheral nervous system, they include the nerves and then the ganglion outside the CNS. Now the nerves, you remember I told you we have some nerves that sense information from the other parts of the body towards the CNS. We have some nerves that sense information from all other parts of your body towards your brain and spinal cord. Those nerves, we call them sensory nerves, or you can call them sensory or efferent nerves. That is what we are saying, sensory division. Now, you can remove the division from there and make it sensory or afferent nerves. Okay, keep it in your mind. So, the peripheral nervous system consists of all the nerves. The nerves, we have two types of nerves. We have nerves that are sending information from other parts of the body to the brain and CNS. We call those nerves what? Sensory or afferent nerves. That is what we are calling the sensory or afferent division. And we have some nerves that brings information from the CNS to other parts of your body. Those ones are what we call the motor or efferent nerves. Okay, so we have two types of nerves. So the peripheral nervous system consists of the nerves. The nerves are in two forms. We have the sensory or afferent nerves. We have the motor or efferent nerves?
Different.
So my question is, what is the sensory division or the afferent division? What is it? The sensory division, what does it do?
They carry information from the other part of the body to the central nervous system.
That is correct. And the motor division or the motor nerves or the efferent nerves, what do they do?
They carry
They carry
information
from the
central
CNS to the
nervous
other
They
parts of the
carry information
from the central nervous system to the other part
To
of
the
the
other
body.
part of the body.
of the
So in
body.
exams, if we ask you that, okay, there is something wrong in your hand, your body needs to send the information to the brain. Which division of the nervous system will do that? There is something wrong in your body, your hand. We want to send that signal to the CNS. Which part of the peripheral nervous system will do that?
sensory
The
division.
sensory.
Or a sensory division or afferent division.
Okay.
All of them can be there.
What else?
Is that okay? Another question we can ask you is that there is something wrong in your hand. Your brain wants to bring information to your hand for an action to be taken. Which division of the central nervous system will be used?
The motor neuron.
Neuron.
Motor neuron
Motor
or the motor division or the efferent division. Have you gotten how it goes?
Yes, sir.
Yes. So now let's go further. Now the sensory division or the sensory neuron or the efferent neuron, they can be further divided. Now sensory means they carry information to the brain. Is that or the spinal cord? Now the sensory can be further divided. We have the somatic sensory and the visceral sensory. Now, this is how it goes. When we say somatic sensory, when we say something is somatic, okay, meaning we are looking at structures like the skin, structures like the muscle, structures like bones, and structures like what? Joints. Okay, in anatomy, when we say somatic, what does it mean? From anatomy 1, when we say something is somatic, what does it mean?
You have control.
When we say something is somatic, what does it mean in anatomy?
It's voluntary.
Are you sure?
I'm trying.
When we say something is somatic in anatomy, what does it mean? Okay, so when we say something is somatic, we are looking at a structure that is closer to the periphery of your body. A structure that is closer to the peripheral areas of your body. Is that okay? Yes. And so when we say somatic sensory, we are looking at all the nerves that carry sensory information from the skin, the muscles, your bones, and joints to the CNS. Okay? So all the nerves that are carrying sensory information from the skin, from your muscles, from your bones, from your joints, all these structures, any nerve that carries information from your skin, your muscles, your bone, your joints towards the central nervous system, that nerve is what? Is the somatic sensory. So if I ask you that, okay, someone is having a problem specifically in the skin. Someone is having a problem specifically in the skin. And we want the information to be sent to the CNS. Which part of the peripheral nervous system specifically will be used? Let me repeat the question again. Someone is having a problem in the skin, and we want the signal to be sent to the central nervous system. Which part of the peripheral nervous system specifically will be used for that? What will be your answer?
A sensory.
The somatic.
Division. So the answer is the sensory division, but specifically the somatic.
Yes.
Is that okay? So in exams, you see that if I bring specifically, you see that the sensory division will be there, and then the somatic sensory will be there. If you choose the sensory division, you are wrong. because the question says specifically. So specifically is the somatic sensory. Okay. So, okay, another question is that someone is having a problem inside the bone joints, and we want the signal to be sent to the CNS and the brain. Which division of the central nervous system specifically would be engaged?
Somatic
division.
The somatic sensory division. Is that okay? Somatic sensory division. All right, that is fine. Now, we also have the visceral sensory. The visceral sensory, there are also sensory nerves that carry information to the CNS. But specifically, when we say something is visceral, meaning it is connected to an organ, an internal organ. Okay, it's connected to an internal organ. Okay, when we say something is somatic, meaning at the peripheral part of the body, or external, it's not an internal, it's an external, it's in an external area in your body. So like your skin, you see your skin is at the peripheral areas. Your joints are not really within the internal organs. Okay, good. Your muscles, they are also at the peripheral areas in your body, somatic sensory. Is that okay? Good. And most of the time, most of the somatic areas, you have voluntary control over them. Okay, good. Now, the visceral areas, the visceral organs, you don't really have voluntary control over them. Is that okay? Now, the visceral organs are basically internal organs, like the heart, the lungs, the stomach. So if there is a problem in your stomach and we want signal to be sent to your CNS, we will use the visceral sensory. You can't say you use the somatic sensory. Okay, if there is a problem in your lungs and we want the information to be sent to your CNS, we will use the visceral sensory division. So a question that I can ask you is that, a patient is having a problem with respiration and we want signal to be sent to the CNS. Which specific division of the peripheral nervous system will be engaged? What will be your answer? The visceral sensory division. Okay, lastly, a patient is having a problem with the digestive system, and we want signal to be sent to the CNS. Which specific division of the peripheral nervous system will be engaged? Division. The last one. A patient is having a problem in the bones or with bones. We want the signal to be sent to the CNS for integration. Which specific division of the peripheral nervous system will be engaged?
Somatic sensory division.
Somatic sensory division. Okay, now let's go and then conclude. The motor division. The motor division, what does it do? What's the function of the motor division?
Sends information from the
CNS to other parts of the body. We use what? We use the motor division. Now, the motor division to the same way. For example, if your brain is bringing a signal, okay, from a signal is coming from your brain to any somatic organ, like usually your skeletal muscles, okay, it will use the somatic motor. Okay, so if the brain have to bring a signal, okay, usually we say organs that you have voluntary control. Can you mention any part of your body you have voluntary control? Any part of your body you have voluntary control?
My legs.
Your legs, your hands, when you have to turn your neck, your knee, when you have to turn your head, when you have to raise your hand. So a question I can ask you is that, I can say that Lawrence wants to raise his hand. The brain have to bring a signal to enable him raise his hand. Okay, please listen to the question. Lawrence have to raise his hand. The brain have to bring a signal to enable him raise his hand. Which specific division of the peripheral nervous system will be engaged?
Somatic
motor division. Okay. Another thing I can ask you is that a patient in the process of getting up from bed needs signal from the brain to facilitate that process. Which division of the peripheral nervous system would help with that? or would facilitate that activity? What would be your answer?
The motor division of the peripheral system, more specifically the somatic motor.
That is excellent. The motor division, more specifically the somatic motor. Now let's go to the visceral motor division. Now remember, the visceral motor division, you can also call it the autonomic nervous system. So when we say visceral motor, is the visceral motor we also call the autonomic nervous system. So if I ask you what is another name for the visceral motor division, it's the same as the autonomic nervous system. Another name for the visceral motor division is the autonomic nervous system. Okay, so now with the visceral motor, if your brain have to bring an information to a part of your body that you don't have control over, it will use the visceral motor division. Now the question is, do you have control over your heart? Do you have control over your heart?
No.
Do you have control over your lungs?
No.
If you have control over yours, let us know, so that we will come and see you and learn. All right. So if your brain is bringing an information, listen carefully. If your brain is bringing an information to, let's say, your heart is an organ you don't have control over. Your brain is bringing an information to your heart. It will use the visceral motor. Is that okay? If your brain is bringing an information to your digestive system, it will use the visceral motor or the autonomic nervous system. If your brain have to bring a signal to a gland which you don't have control over, it will use the autonomic nervous system or the visceral motor. Is that okay? So I can ask you that, okay, a patient is having a problem with the lungs. A patient is having a problem with the lungs, and we expect the brain to bring a signal to correct that problem. Which division of the peripheral nervous system will be engaged?
The peripheral nervous system, to be specific, the motor division, more specific, the visceral division.
The visceral motor, more specifically, the visceral motor. Okay, a patient is having a problem with the thyroid gland or a problem with the heart, and the CNS is bringing a signal to correct that problem. Which division of the peripheral nervous system will be engaged?
The motor division, more specifically the visceral motor division.
The visceral motor division or the autonomic motor division. But here, under the visceral motor, we have specifics. Here, you have to pay attention. Under the visceral motor, we have specifics. So listen to how the example goes. Now, if a patient is having a problem, listen carefully. I'll ask some few questions before I add on. If a patient is having a problem in the heart, and we want the brain to bring a signal to come and correct it, which division will be used? A patient is having a problem in the heart. We want the brain to bring signal. Which division will be used?
Motor division,
Motor,
the peripheral nervous system, more specifically the visceral motor.
the sympathetic motor division.
The subdivision
The
goes.
motor division.
Now, if a patient is having a problem in the heart, let's say the heart is underworking. Listen carefully. The heart is underworking. Listen carefully. The heart is underworking. Now, we want the brain to bring a signal. Listen carefully. Let's assume, think about this. If the heart is underworking and the brain is bringing a signal to correct the problem, what signal do you think should come? Pay attention and give me a good response. The heart is working slow, and we want the brain to bring a signal to correct it. What signal do you expect the brain to bring?
The motor division.
Please, you are not following the question. You are not. No, those who are saying motor division, you are not following the question. The heart is working slow. If your heart is working slow and you want something to correct it, what do you think will correct it? Oh, if your heart is working slower and we want it to be corrected, how will it be corrected? If your heart is working slow and we want to correct it, how do you want it to be corrected? It has to work faster.
Yes.
Yes.
To
So
get
why couldn't you answer? Yes. If something is working slow and you want a response to correct it, what response? It's a response to make it work faster. Is that okay? So what that means is that if your heart is working slow and we want the brain to correct it, the information we are expecting to come from the brain will be that the information will come and increase the heart. You get it? So for example, if your heart is working slow and we want the brain to come and correct it, what response are we expecting? We are expecting a response that will come and increase your heartbeat. Is that okay? Let me turn it the other way around. If your heart is working faster and the brain is bringing a response, what response are you expecting?
response that will make it
Please don't jump. We didn't mention parasympathetic. We've not gotten there yet. We are gradually getting there. If your heart is working faster, and we want the brain to bring a certain information to come and correct, what information are you expecting from the brain?
a signal that will make the heart work slower.
Some of you are thinking too high. Okay, if you are eating faster, and your mother wants you to correct that problem, what will your mother tell you to do?
Tell you to slow down.
If you are eating too slow and your parents want you to correct it, what will they tell you?
They will tell you to eat faster. Maybe a little.
That simple as that is what we are talking about. So if your heart is working slower and we want the brain to bring an information to come and correct it, what information are we expecting from the brain?
That will make the heart work faster.
Excellent. Now, anytime, listen carefully, anytime the central nervous system is bringing an information to a visceral organ and the information is meant to go and cause an increase, it will use the visceral motor, but specifically the sympathetic division. Please listen to it carefully. Anytime the central nervous system have to bring an information to a visceral organ, let's say the heart, the lungs, and let's say the information, we want the information to come and cause an increase. Specifically, it will use the sympathetic division. So the question I can ask you is that, okay, there is a patient who is having a very low respiratory rate, okay, and signals are coming from the CNS to correct it. Where specific division of the visceral motor will be engaged? What will be your answer?
Sympathetic
The sympathetic division. Another question I can ask you: a patient is having a very high respiratory rate. A patient is having a very high respiratory rate. The CNS is bringing an information to come and correct it. Where specific division of the visceral motor will be engaged?
Parasympathetic.
This time, the parasympathetic. Is that okay? Now, another question I can ask you is that, okay, there is a patient who is having a problem with his BP. The BP is very high. Which is a problem in the heart. Remember, the BP is very high. The brain is bringing an information to come and correct it. Which division of the visceral motor will be engaged?
The parasympathetic.
The division of the parasympathetic. Is that okay? Parasympathetic division.
Yeah.
Is that okay? Good. So the subdivisions under the viscera, it depends on the information we are expecting. Okay, so if I ask you a question that, okay,
Hello, say.
Say we can't hear you.
We can't hear you. The previous question you asked, I couldn't hear you.
The network is messing up.
First network is gone.
Okay, so I'm repeating it again. Can you hear me? Yeah, so I'm repeating it again. So what I'm saying is that there is a problem with the heart. For example, the BP, a patient BP is very low. Okay. And we want the brain to bring a signal. Now remember the situation. The BP is what? Very low. So if the BP is very low and we want an information from the brain, what information are we expecting? If BP is very low, we want information from the brain. What information are we expecting?
We need the information that will make the BP go high.
Excellent. That is excellent. This shows that your reasoning ability is very good. Yes. If your BP is very low and we want an information, the only information we are expecting is an information that will let your BP go high. Now, anytime the brain has to bring an information to come and cause an increase, it will use the sympathetic. Anytime the brain has to bring an information to come and cause an increase in a visceral organ, it will use the sympathetic. Okay, now let me turn this, it's the other way around. Your BP is very high. We need information from the brain. What information are we expecting?
Information that will make it
Information to make it go down.
Anytime the brain have to bring an information to a visceral organ to come and slow it down, it will use the parasympathetic. You see how it goes. So if the examiner asks you that a patient is having a very low respiratory rate, please listen carefully. A patient is having a very low respiratory rate. The brain have to communicate a signal to come and correct the problem. Okay. Which division of the visceral motor will be engaged?
The sympathetic.
The sympathetic. Why the sympathetic?
Because that increase.
Yes, because the problem there is that the respiratory rate is low and we are expecting an increase. So it's the sympathetic division that will be engaged. Okay, the last one. A patient is having a problem. A patient is having a very low BP, very low blood pressure. The heart rate is very poor, very low. And the brain is bringing a signal to come and correct it. Which division of the visceral motor will be engaged?
The sympathetic.
The sympathetic division. Now, let's do the very tricky one. Now, there is a patient who is having poor digestion, very low digestion. A patient is having very low digestion. And the brain have to bring a signal to come and correct it. Which division of the visceral motor will be engaged?
Parasympathetic.
Yes.
Parasympathetic.
Why parasympathetic? Why parasympathetic? Yes, those who mentioned parasympathetic.
The parasympathetic is it.
Come again.
You said in digestion, the parasympathetic rate increases it. It increases
It increases digestion. Digestion. That is excellent. It increases digestion. So when it comes to digestion alone, digestion is an exception. It's exceptional. So all the time, sympathetic increases and parasympathetic rather calms the body down. But digestion is very exceptional. When it comes to digestion alone, the parasympathetic rather will bring increase and the sympathetic will bring decrease. Please keep it in your mind though. So if I set a question like, a patient is having fast digestion and we expect a signal from the brain to come and correct it, which specific division of the visceral motor will be engaged? What will be your answer?
The sympathetic.
The sympathetic division of the visceral motor. Is that okay? Yes. So in summary, the nervous system, we have two broad classifications. We have the central nervous system, which consists of the brain and the spinal cord. We have the peripheral nervous system, which consists of all the nerves and ganglia outside the body. Now, the peripheral nervous system can be further divided into two. We have the sensory or efferent division. When we say sensory or efferent division, there's the division of the peripheral that carries information from all the other parts of the body towards the brain and then the spinal cord. Now, sub under the central and efferent division, We have the somatic sensory and then the visceral sensory. Now, if we want an information to be sent to the brain from areas like your skin, your muscles, your bones, and your joints, we will use the somatic sensory. If you want an information to be sent to your brain and spinal cord from internal organs like the heart, the lungs, the stomach, we would use the visceral sensory division. Now, the motor division, on the other hand, is responsible for bringing information from your CNS to other parts of your body. Okay, and that division is also further divided into the somatic motor and then the visceral motor. The visceral motor is also called the autonomic nervous system. The visceral motor is also called the autonomic nervous system. Under the visceral motor, we have the sympathetic and then the parasympathetic. So if the brain have to bring a signal to come and cause an increase in an internal organ, it will use the sympathetic. If the brain have to bring a signal to come and decrease activity in an internal organ, it will use the parasympathetic. And if the brain have to bring an information to an organ you have voluntary control over, okay, it will use the somatic motor or the voluntary control of the voluntary control division. So that's the somatic motor. Okay, so pay attention to the divisions of the nervous system. Usually you would have about 5 questions from this classification in the MCQs, and it is very possible I can ask you to redraw it again, the division again in exams. Okay, so we can end over here for today. It's very possible tomorrow we will finish the nervous system. Then in our next meeting next week in class, we will start with the endocrine system. I wish you guys all the best. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
So please have a good night.
Bye.